Good to be in the Canaan Media studio for this episode of the Big Little Bus Ministry. I wanted to have Brother Tyson, Dr. William Tyson, and the great Pastor Reeves on the channel, and thankful to Canaan Radio and the studio here for allowing me to use this because I could not fit everybody into my small office. It's been a little awkward. But of course, this episode is on how to buy a bus, and I want to get two different perspectives from both Brother Tyson, who has a bus them in ministry where he is able, well, I'll let you talk about it a little bit, and then of course my pastor, my dad, who's been the pastor here for over 20 years and has had his share of buying buses even before he got here to North Platte. So Brother Tyson, we'll start with you. If you want to just tell everybody a little bit about your ministry that you have.
So I'm pastor of Woodlawn Baptist Church, been there 14 years, and as pastor, been there 40 years overall. And about 6 years ago, we started a ministry called Bus Them In. The idea is we help independent Baptist churches across the country and really the world get into the bus ministry and buy their first bus. And many ministries we talk to are moving from a van to a bus because of growth, which is awesome. And so the idea is just to raise money and buy buses or get churches that have buses that still are in good shape and for whatever reason moving on to new buses or downsizing, whatever they're doing, to be able to donate those buses. And so we've been able to do that. As of this recording today, we just announced bus number 62.
Man.
And so we have 62 buses, about 30 different states,
wow,
6 foreign countries, and the Lord's been good.
Amen. That's an amazing ministry. And if you are interested or you're needed help with getting a bus, feel free to contact him. I'll put the link somewhere in the description or something like that. Dad, if you want to tell a little bit about yourself.
Pastor Bill Reeves, North Platte Baptist Church, and been in the ministry a lot of years, 30 maybe years. Bought my share of buses, and I pastored 5 churches. This is the 5th church, and hopefully my last. Every church that I pastored had a bus ministry, and so we've had to purchase our buses and service our buses, and there's a lot to it, but it's very rewarding as you see young people get saved. That's why I like Brother Tyson's ministry, Bus Them In. He sends those buses out there, and immediately there's a return. I mean, immediately you're seeing 13, 15, 20, 25 kids on the first Sunday come to church. Always someone saved that first Sunday.
Yep.
So it's definitely a worthwhile investment for any preachers in any ministry to give towards that and support the Bus Them In bus ministry.
Amen. A very practical episode for this one because you can't really have a bus ministry without a vehicle, without the bus necessarily. So if you're interested in starting a bus route or a bus ministry at your church, I guess the first step inside of that, of course, if you're the pastor, would be tracking down a bus. Of course, you'll need bus drivers and bus workers and those types of things. But coming from both of your perspectives, Brother Tyson buys buses quite often, and then even from the more, I guess you could say, rural area, smaller church ministry that we've been in here, or in other areas that you've been in, other areas even in Georgia where it wasn't quite as, I guess it was more populated, you could say. But what would you say, Brother Tyson and Dad, this is a question to both of you, is your process for when you're sitting down and like, okay, I need to find a bus, how can I go about that?
So, generally what we do at Bus Them In, I mean, we have various sources that we, try to look to when we're looking for buses. And, really, I'll be honest, it's about praying and asking God to give you direction and wisdom. There's a lot out there, a lot of junk out there that, and unscrupulous folks that just are trying to sell stuff that is not good. And to be honest, I'm not a mechanic. I don't look at these buses. I try to get folks to take a look before we pull the trigger. But ultimately, when you think about buying a bus, the best sources are to create or make contacts. Just like anything in ministry, once you have a trusted source, you kind of start going back to that well more and more. And we've been able to develop a few of those, trusted resellers of buses over the years, and that's kind of been my primary. We've also gone to to, places where I think everybody realizes, Facebook Marketplace. There's some bus sale groups actually on social media and Facebook that you can become a member of, and you just get a feel for what the market is doing. Buses have gone up in prices recently, but as I told somebody earlier today, just because they're asking for that amount doesn't mean that's what you pay. You make an offer, and what you think is the right number. We've had some success in other auctions locally, across the country. Different territories or counties have different rules for how old a bus can be. And getting a feel for or getting connections with those bus lots is fantastic, and something that I think every church should do that's interested in expanding bus ministries. But that's kind of where we've gone, those myriad of places. And I'm always looking, even when we're not really prepared to buy a bus, I'm always looking to, kind of keep on hand, keep a pulse of what's happening. And that way, when we're ready to pull a trigger, we know whether it's a good deal or not.
Well, I've always considered three aspects to buying buses. It's your money is the first area, what you have to spend on a bus. Then the market. You have to find where you can buy a good bus from. I always recommend, especially because I've always pastored in small places, I always start with my local area. I go around to see if there are buses somewhere parked on a lot somewhere for sale. I have found buses at times in mechanics' yards. They have been brought into the mechanic shop to be worked on and then put back, or somebody was getting rid of it and it's just sitting there. I always, since they're in my town, I take 5 minutes, get out of my car and go talk and find out the information about that vehicle. So you get the money, you get the market, and then you get ministry. So finding a ministry like Brother Tyson provides is really just something that has started, in the last 10 years.
6 years.
6 years. So in the last 6 years, and before that, I'd never heard of a ministry that would actually help you locate a bus or point you in the right direction or give you the structure of what to look for. I've always just gotten as much information as I can on what used buses and the market is in the used bus industry, how many miles. When I went to college, they recommended staying within 10 years. That has gotten longer. You can actually get a bus 15 years of age and still have the mileage that for a church our size that only runs that bus every Sunday morning, and the town is smaller.
Right.
I mean, I think we've been here 20 years and I bought buses 3 times. Replaced the whole fleet from gas to diesel 5 years ago. It's about 5 years ago. And before that, we just simply bought, we had gas. We had one other diesel bus, but gas buses. And there's really, I don't know if I have a preference on it, but the market has changed that almost all public schools are buying diesel buses now. They're not really buying gas buses. And you got sizes too. You'll have a 28 passenger, you'll have a 55 or 56 passenger, and you can buy 72 to 77 passenger buses. They're different sizes, basically 3 different classes of bus sizes, and just depends on what's available. But I've also used, I have been on my travels driving down the expressway and looked over and saw 3 or 4 buses that were for sale. They're used, clearly used. Somebody went to the auction at the public school, had gotten rid of their buses or rotated their buses out, and they bought them in an auction, which when you go to auction, you're going to get them way cheaper. And they bought 3 or 4 of them, and they resell them to make a profit. Well, I have a guy in Iowa I found like that, and he doesn't mark it up much at all, and I can come out and pick from his thing. But then I would also recommend to be bold enough to stop along the expressway where you see hundreds of buses parked, or go to your public schools and get to know the mechanics and the people running the garage and see if you can get an inside information on when they're rotating buses out. Sometimes in smaller towns, your actual local public school system would love to be able to help you get a vehicle. So I've never spent more than, I don't think I've ever spent more than $1,500, maybe $2,000 for a bus. Now, we've painted it and we've done some work to them, but we don't have a lot of problems. We have a good bus maintenance program and stay on top of it. So Brother Tyson's bus ministry is a lot bigger, and he's blowing engines every 2 weeks or something like that. But
That's what it feels like.
so
We are a ministry to the tow truck drivers in our county.
it's not hard. It's not hard, and I would encourage guys, pastors, to just like if you needed a car, you do your shopping, due diligence.
And I guess that's what I was going to say. Let's say if I was going to buy a bus and I was either scrolling on Facebook Marketplace or maybe just online somewhere, or I went to actually look at a bus, I guess what would be some advice that you would give me as I look for those specific types of bus, or maybe I know you referenced a little bit of that, but in your experience of buying those buses, because I think for me the thing that would worry me the most is getting a bad deal for something that breaks down in just like a couple weeks. So are there some broad advice you could give?
I think the reality is this: no matter what you buy, you need to be prepared it's going to break down. You know, the bus ministries, these buses, they're going to have maintenance requirements, and you have to be prepared for that. And that's one of the questions that we ask as we're working with churches. You know, it's not just getting the bus, it's keeping the bus rolling, you know, and there's a lot of work behind the scenes that needs to take place. As you know, it's not just the drivers and the workers, it's mechanics, it's somebody doing maintenance, it's someone giving to the ministry to make sure that if you need a water pump, you know, that you actually have the money in the budget to pay for it, so it's not sitting there for 6 months while you're trying to get money back, and then all of a sudden the bus has fallen apart. You know, the reality is every ministry needs to assess what type of bus they need. And Brother Reeves mentioned, you know, from, a smaller 28 passenger to a 77. Every church is different. Bus to Men has probably donated about a dozen, we call them mini buses, those 20 to 28 passenger. Most of those have gone to, city ministries. You go to New York City, you're not going to have a full-size bus. Public schools don't run full-size buses, or else they'll be paying for everyone's mirrors. And so you have to look at your own ministry, what you're trying to accomplish. Rural areas that have a bigger ministry, they might want to get a 77 passenger. They can put a lot more people in there, and they're in the open road a lot. So it's really, what are you looking for? And the reality is, anywhere you're buying it, somebody's making a profit. Brother Reeves mentioned auctions. Auctions are great, but you just need to know it's most auctions, you're going to do some serious work to those buses of some type. And once in a while, you're going to run into a lemon, and you need to assess it, and don't plow money into something that's never going to resurrect. Sometimes it's hard to walk away from a bus that you put money into, but you got to be wise about it. And so, it really is a matter of what you're looking for. We mentioned gas, diesel. Everything we do pretty much is diesel.
I think when I get to looking for a bus, I try to stay on a time frame. So 10 years was what it was before. I'd say 15 years now. So I guess 5 years ago we bought the buses we have now, and the newest one is 2006. But then you look at mileage. So obviously, if they're coming from a city like Chicago, you're going to be doing good to find a bus that's not over 200,000 miles. Yeah. So I generally look at 120 to 150,000 miles, and I look in smaller towns, Dubuque, Iowa. They're not huge towns, and they're always coming from the public school districts because they have. I like that because they're doing maintenance on them, and they have to state law now. We're different than Brother Tyson State. We have no testing, no emissions. We have no inspections. So we just go buy a bus, as long as the wheels go around. But don't buy a bus because it's got great seats and the floor's solid, and think that, okay, you're good. You might be spending $2,000 to replace the motor in it. So, but also, be careful. You go buy something that sounds good, it's running good, but you go step up in the well there, and it's all rotted.
Apart, yeah.
It's rotted, and it's a safety hazard. So
I think it is very important that, and I've learned this because we've had a few lessons, that rust is very important. And the further north you go,
important not to have.
Yeah, important to recognize. The further north you go in looking at buses, the more likely it is that one, they are susceptible to rust because of snow and all of that. And so you do want to know what the history generally is of a bus. You know, what area are they coming from? I've bought some buses that have come from some, districts up in New York that they kept their buses actually in a hangar, and each evening when there's been salt and snow on the road, they had a machine that cleaned under it to get all that out. That's good.
Yeah.
That helps. Now, the reality is you're going to run into rust no matter what. So you need to be able to assess that rust, make sure it's not, affecting frames and it's more surface, and you need to deal with it, especially if you're taking it through inspection. We did have one bus, M ministry bus, that it failed inspection, and they basically deemed it no good. You can't use it. And that was a loss. And it was not necessary because it could have been either assessed up front, or it was still a good running bus. It wasn't like it would fall through. We could have moved it south to where they had, rules that weren't as crazy. So
now, let me say also to the smaller town pastor, the rural pastors, what has made our bus ministry so successful through the years, as far as buying buses and keeping them running, we haven't lost buses. We really haven't gotten any what I would call lemons and taken a loss. The reason that is because I run my bus ministry and I seek out buses like we do have inspections, state mandated. Is like I try to do it like if I were in DC or in Chicago, and I'd say if you're in those big places, even buses have bus companies that provide the driver and the bus, and it's just a company. It's not really the school. You can go to them too, and they have good maintenance programs as well. So, it just depends on how much time, but just to get started, I would just look for 10 years, 10 to 12, 15 years old. I keep my costs down by looking at the market, and then I don't have any problem looking at a guy who's selling a bus and saying, hey, this is for a church. Yeah. We're going to bring kids to church, cut me a deal. And most of the time they will.
Yeah, and we've gotten a lot of discounts because of what we're doing. I tell folks all the time, we're buying them. I was like, look, I'm buying this bus to give it away. What's your best price?
Right.
And this is what we're willing to pay if they're kind of deer in the headlight. So,
not forgetting to really put the ministry aspect in front of those that you're trying to buy it from.
I will say it's important that when you buy a bus, it will help your bus ministry, but more importantly, it will help your church if you paint it. Put some time into it. It's not hard. You can learn to do it yourself, and you can get vinyl letters, put them on there, make it look sharp, and that will help the testimony. So many guys get buses and I wouldn't put my kid on it to ride. I mean, it looks terrible, And I think the classier your bus is, the nicer the bus is, the more your church is.
It's a billboard. I mean, it's a reflection of your church. It's, people get to know who you are because of your buses in town. I mean, we knock on doors all the time. Folks always say it's blue bus. Yeah, I've seen them,
Man. Yep, I've heard it said your bus ministry, your buses, your fleet is your biggest billboard. Yeah. So definitely important not to forget that aspect as well. Well, thank you both for giving us some of your past examples and some of your knowledge. I appreciate that. I think one of the things that anybody can take from this is you can't be afraid to work. Amen. Don't get in the bus ministry if you're scared and not willing to work, because sometimes you have to roll your sleeves up. You may not know what you're doing. Yeah. But you got to be willing to do it.
Yep.